G, and so we'll get her take on Bankstergate as well. But we are very honored to have Birgitta Jónsdóttir on with us. Thank you so much for coming on.
Well, thanks for having me. However, I have to correct one thing about the banks. The bank that we are supposed to be covering was a privately run bank by Icelanders. But
it made the investments in the derivatives.
Yes, of course. So we were basically conned. The entire nation was conned. And the thing is that the Brits and the Dutch, they want us to pay back with huge interest. So they're actually making money off us, money that never reached Iceland. And most Icelanders had never heard of these accounts before everything collapsed. And they put the anti-terrorist law on us, almost like guinea pigs, because they had not tried to use that particular Terror Act law. And instead of putting it on the bank in the beginning, which was privately owned, they put it on Iceland. And actually, during our incredible system, almost the entire system collapsed, when all the big banks collapsed, they decided to put the Terrorist Act on us. So we were very close to not having food in Iceland.
Amazing. Now, start at the beginning for people that don't understand what's happening and why this is so important globally, with what happened in Iceland, the chain of events, and now the incredible fight you and others are leading against the banking cartel, literally turning your country into a vassal state through economic fraudulent conquest.
Well, it all happened a few years ago. All the big banks were actually government-owned, or the people owned them. And we had a conservative party run Iceland for 18 years, and during that period they basically privatized everything the people owned, including the banks, a few years ago. And they sold the banks relatively cheaply to friends and allies, and they made, in a very short period of time, all the legislation vanish that would have them, having to not expand as quickly as they did. They became 5 times bigger than the annual GDP. And so when they collapsed, you can imagine how huge blow it was for the nation.
Now, today, in Iceland, there's been, almost a year of protest and people taking over government buildings and saying no, and a key vote is coming up by the people of Iceland on whether or not you're going to capitulate to this fraud. Can you walk us through that?
Yes, just around the time when, the banking system collapsed, protests started. People were actually quite shocked because they had been conned. And we wanted to get the government out of office, which is impossible by legislation. So we had the soft revolution, driving the government away. And then when we got a new government, which apparently is just like the old one, unfortunately, with all their secrecy and bowing to the IMF, which, I really think that we need to get a plan B to get rid of. And there's been an ongoing protest, and it's growing bigger and bigger again because people are very unhappy with the way the new government is handling things, even though it is the first left-wing government in the history of Iceland. Because you can't run left-wing politics with the IMF controlling the national budget. And we've been, in the parliament. I just got fresh into parliament. I'm not really a politician by heart. And our movement, we were created out of all the different grassroots that popped up after the collapse. And we got just in 8 weeks more than 7% of the vote. And we didn't have any money, no big money people behind us, just a relentless effort of ordinary people who wanted to build a bridge between parliament and the people. So, when we got into parliament, the Icesave dilemma landed in our lap. And we found out that they wanted to pass this huge burden on the nation without even the parliamentarians seeing the contract between Iceland and the Dutch and the British government. So the fight started there. And fortunately, the contract was leaked. And that has been a great blessing for us, that so much of the material they wanted to hide from us and the nation has been leaked on sites like WikiLeaks and into the media in Iceland. However, we managed to change the contract this summer, which was actually a totally unique and a new way also for other nations that are suffering from, spending all their national budget, all the GDP on just paying interest of foreign debt. So in the changes on the bill, we managed to put in that we would never pay more than we could handle. And of course the British and the Dutch did not like that, and they demanded that we would actually change Icelandic law in order for them to accept it. And our government decided to listen to them. Unbelievable that they pushed another bill through with there was a question if they would actually manage to get majority for it or not. And when they passed it during that time, which was by force, the nation got up to its feet, and 23% of the nation signed the petition asking the president of Iceland, who is the last person to sign all law, to not sign this law and let the nation vote on it. So this is the first time in Icelandic history since we voted on becoming a sovereign state when we got out of the Danish colonism in 1944. So it's truly historical, and I really hope that we will have the courage to vote no to this out of courage, but not yes out of fear. Because of course there is a great spin, and that is why it is so important for the Icelandic people to feel the support of the people of the world who are fed up with bailing out the bankers.
We're talking to Birgitta Jónsdóttir, a member of the Icelandic parliament. She is also the chairman of her new party that is rising to power there, as people see that they're actually standing up for the population against fraud. The population has been on the edge of near revolt. We've played those videos here of people taking over banks, government buildings, mainline families, middle class, wealthy people, working class, because literally the country was imploded by design. Food wasn't even coming in. They export and import in a lot of their food. Just absolutely hellish. So I want to go over the fact that some news reports have said 5 times your GDP that the bank went into with derivative scams. Some have said 10 times GDP. You're saying 5 times GDP. And, the actual bondage, the financial enslavement to these people, and that they were doing it all in secret, just like our banker takeover in October of 2008 was done in secret. And everything else is done in secret by these banks that form the shadow government. So can you speak to the type of hardship this has created for your country and the secrecy that these people were trying to engage in to get your country to sign on to even more tyranny?
Well, what the previous government managed to do was to create a law that allowed the banks to maintain complete secrecy of, their loan books and so forth. Even if now all the banks, especially the bank that controls the iSave accounts, is now taken over by the government. We, the parliamentarians, can't, and not even the Minister of Finance has seen what is supposed to be the bond or the assets that are supposed to cover iSave. And I've asked for it from day one, since last summer, officially and unofficially, and they're just the state within the state, the liquidity committees. However, I think people are awakening to the fact and starting to demand more, which they didn't. And I think one of the good things about this difficult situation, which means, there's a lot of people moving away from Iceland. There's a huge brain drain already happening. And we used to be the 5th richest nation in the world. And now we're ranked among the 4th most likely nation to go bankrupt or go into debt moratorium. And, we had very little poverty here, and there was a very little gap between the rich and poor. However, that all changed with the new billionaires that basically got everything given on a silver platter, and are now responsible for the reason why we're here, but their assets have not been frozen yet.
Birgitta, stay there. We're going to come right back to you after this break. But this is the story. This is what the IMF, the World Bank,